This feature, The Future of Housing, is funded by the News Reporting Scheme.
And this feature, The Future of Housing, will deliver sustained, in-depth reporting on housing in County Clare to provide clarity, context and accountability. Each week we'll examine a different aspect of the crisis, from supply and pricing trends to planning permission barriers, social housing allocations, mortgage access and the role of sustainable rural building, answering the key questions. This week, Diarmuid McMahon, President of Ennis Chamber and auctioneer at Sherry Fitzgerald McMahon in Ennis, and George Stavrou, former Clare CATU Chair, will look at the current rental market in Clare, challenges faced by tenants, landlord trends and new rent rules. Diarmuid, I might get the ball rolling with yourself. Can you just set the scene for us from what you're seeing on the ground in Ennis and across Clare? How competitive is the rental market at the moment?
Look, it's the same picture, I suppose, across the country, and it's just as acute in Clare. The rental market is incredibly tight. Just the volume that's available, what people are even seeing online. I just looked at DAF there this morning. I think the town of Ennis, there's 10 properties advertised for rent, which is really shocking. I suppose it's the same story you see throughout the country, and I suppose what we've actually seen, unfortunately, in the last few weeks, and I think all agents will agree to this, is an uptick in the number of landlords going to market because of the new, rightly or wrongly, but they have decided themselves that they've decided to move on from the market, which I don't think is absolutely necessary, but that's the choice a lot of landlords have made, unfortunately, is to end their tenancies. Now, they would have had to have given notice on those tenancies some time ago, but we're definitely seeing that happening.
Yeah, and that is something you've flagged up with us before, yes. Landlords, and as we, for want of a better phrase, we're calling them the mom and pop landlords,
yes.
Leaving the rental market locally. And in terms of supply and rent levels, as much as landlords can be painted, tarred with the same brush, it is leading to a lack of supply, and that's not good for renters.
No, it's reducing that, and I suppose the challenge, I think sympathy really has to be with the tenants at the moment, because they're really in the crosshairs of this, is that I suppose the double-edged sword with the new legislation is that anybody entering into a new tenancy today and after the 1st of March is that they'll have security of tenure for the next 6 years, in terms of that they can't, except in very exceptional situations they can be asked to vacate the property, but other than that they can stay, but they will be facing full whatever the market rent is at the moment, because you would have had situations before where landlords, where a tenant had moved out, they would have been constrained by the rent pressure zone controls, but rentals from the 1st of March don't have that control.
George, just to bring you in, let's talk about the new rent rules. They've now come into effect, but from CATU's perspective, what do they mean for renters in Clare?
We do expect to see more evictions, as Diarmuid had just said. There's been an uptick. In Clare, we do have, as he's said, mom and pop landlords. We don't have these massive landlords like Dublin. Although we do have some, actually. We have one or two in Ennis and Shannon. But with the new rules, basically, we do plan to see more evictions because, house owners are incentivized to evict to raise to the market rate. Also, with the new protections, we would have annual rent increases between 2% of your rent, or tied to inflation, but 2% was always lower. That's also been scrapped. It's now tied to inflation, which isn't. It's about 2.7 at the moment. So the RTB also released recently the average increases across Ireland, each county. For County Clare, it gives an average increase of €3,108 per household per year. So yeah, it's not really looking too easy for tenants at this moment, no.
Do you want to respond to that, Diarmuid?
Yeah, no, just on the one point there that was made in relation to, just to be clear, a landlord can't give, in the new rules, can't give a tenant notice in order to evict them so that they can get to market rent. that's actually specifically prohibited. So
it's only once the property becomes vacant that the landlords can reset the rent to market rates, but they can't enforce that to happen.
No, I mean, okay, so if either the landlord or the tenant, or if the tenant is in breach of the lease covenants, well, then that's a different thing. But if the tenant is paying their rent and they're looking after the property, it's only if the tenant decides to leave the property that the landlord can mark to market, if you like, with the rent.
George, I'll let you come back on that. Are you concerned some landlords would try and paint a different picture of how well maintained the property is being by the tenant, as opposed to how the tenant might view that, and that could potentially lead to their eviction and then allow the landlord to reset rents to market rates?
So there's two things here. There is this new rule coming. I should have been more clear. I expect to see more evictions, I suppose, prior to the rules, but the rules are now in place. So now you do have this protection of 6 years, which, initially was scaring asset owners, right? But there's a difference between large and small landlords. Small landlords, I believe, is 3 properties or less, and large is more. Large landlords cannot give reasons for evictions as easily, which is, a good thing. Small landlords, however, can still evict on grounds of hardship, right? Can often be a little bit vague, like financial hardship, etc. But
sorry, I actually, the legislation is, it's actually kind of specific on that. I mean, you need to be in a situation where you're dealing with a PIP, where a personal insolvency practitioner, bankruptcy. Like, it's not vague. It's not somebody saying, I'm finding things tight, I need to get this property back. And I suppose ultimately the tenant and the landlord will have, you do have the PRTB, and it's their job to adjudicate that, and to go through that process. So it's not as simple as, well, I want you to go because I'm a bit short on cash.
Okay, and look, I do want to move on to other aspects of this, but just on the measures, George, the government arguing they're necessary to encourage more landlords to stay in the market and increase housing supply. Do you believe that argument stacks up? Will it bear out that way?
Well, this is kind of the central contradiction of this. So we are looking for private investments to build houses, right? And what is a good investment? Something with high returns. So in this case, the returns are people's rents. So your rent is someone else's return, right? And so if we start to, incentivize this, then how are we lowering rents, right? We could get the private sector to build more houses, etc. But this also could result in why would rents lower then? If they lower, then they're not going to build more houses. So it's I think this is a bit of a plaster solution. It's not really a long-term solution, in my opinion here. I mean, that's basically it, Okay,
Diarmuid, I want to come back to you on, terms of the difficulties in securing accommodation. You mentioned the very small number of properties available in Ennis at the moment. What types of properties are most in demand? Which groups are finding it hardest to secure accommodation? Or is it, regardless of group, is it difficult anyway? Because, we're hearing from many listeners saying they're applying for dozens of properties without success.
Yeah, and I can understand that, and I suppose it is really across the board. It's
doesn't matter about someone's background, family, single renter, or anything like that, or
no. Definitely, I think somebody by themselves is going to find it challenging. I looked there. I just saw one bed apartment available in the town. It's advertised at €1,200. You know what I mean? So, for a single person, if they were by themselves, that's very, very challenging income wise. So, what I would say to tenants is, and my recommendation is that a lot of what's happening on the websites is probably too late. Do you know what I mean?
So in what other ways can they get ahead of the pack, I guess, in finding out if something more suitable or even just available, even if it's not suitable? I guess people are so stuck for options, they'll...
I think really getting in contact with the letting agents, okay, but what I'm suggesting is that you put a personal pack together, okay, like a CV, if you like, but you have it made very what do landlords and agents want? They want somebody who's going to look after their property and pay the rent. So you have to paint that picture that you are the person, and to be honest, looking after the property is often more important than, getting the last penny of rent out of something for most landlords. They want to make sure that they're not going to arrive in a situation in a few years' time where they're going to have to spend thousands of euros because the property's been damaged. They want somebody who's trustworthy. So trust is the key. So you need to prepare a presentation, for want of a better description, a CV. This is who I am. These are my details. These are my references. This is my work reference. This is my previous landlord reference. I've a letter here of a person of good standing. I'm not going to mess with your property. I'm going to look after it. Okay.
Yeah.
And these are my contact details. These are how many people are going to be in the property. And it sounds very simple, but the number of people who will say, if you're a landlord and agent and there's hundreds of applications coming through, it's the ones that are presented the best are the ones that are going to have the best chance of success. And
George, to bring you in on that, I mean, it can see, on the one hand, I can see entirely the sense in what Diarmuid is saying, but I guess it points to the stark scenario we find ourselves in, that people are effectively having to offer up a CV or audition for a property.
Well, yeah, I mean, it shows you which side has the power on in this market at the moment. The level of conversation we are having now is putting the onus on thousands of people facing homelessness, which is increased by over 230% in this country. And the onus is on the years of failed policy that we have had in this country. CATU's opinion is that we need to have universal public housing here in this situation. We cannot rely on the private sector to house people anymore in this country. It doesn't really work. And it's I'm not trying to attack small landlords here. In Clare, we have this mom and pop landlord. I mean, putting up a CV for who you are so you can have a house to live in is it's really difficult, And I get the sense in what you're saying. You want your house to be looked after by the tenant. In often cases, there's going to be money that's needed to be put into the house and having someone to look after it. I get all that, but I suppose at the end of the day, people want their own houses as well. Someplace they can call a home, not someone else's home.
Diarmuid, do you want to come in there?
I agree. People do want a home that they can call their own, but and I think that's everybody's aspiration. Completely understandable. But I suppose you have different terms of tenure in people's lives and circumstances. And the letting market is I think we're all agreed is an important step within that. But if you're going, all I'm saying is the easier you make your presentation, if you like, to the agent and the landlord, the better the chance you have of securing that tenancy. And if you're going for a job, you present yourself. You're being entrusted with somebody's property. You know what I mean? You're moving into their property, whether you would prefer to be doing that or not. That's the reality.
I guess just the shock to the system for people is, for so long they didn't have to do that, but now, while it seems eminently sensible, it's still a shock to people. They're now going to have to. They can understand why they've had to do that to get a job, but they've never had to do it to get a property. But I guess if you don't want to do it, that's your own choice. But then you're not putting your best foot forward. And
all I can do is suggest to people in terms of what's putting your best foot forward, and that's like everything in life, isn't it? I mean, how you present yourself and how you put yourself forward is going to give you the best opportunity. So it's the same in a situation where you're taking over somebody's property.
George, I'm just curious in terms of what CATU, the cases you're dealing with locally in Clare, what other kind of challenges tenants are facing right now that we perhaps haven't mentioned yet?
I'd say the main challenges facing rural tenants in particular in Munster as well as not just Clare, would be the price of rent compared to the very low standard of rental accommodation stock. We meet people who pay, crazy money, $1,600 a month for houses that are mouldy, not in great condition, but as we mentioned before, the power is not in favour of the tenant. Yeah. And Diarmuid did mention before, the RTB processes, we get the RTB is there, but they are swamped. And I'm not actually giving out about them. They've been helpful in some cases, but oftentimes the tenant does not even want to go and complain to the RTB. We've even had people living at HAP in mouldy houses who don't want to kick up a fuss because they have a house. A big issue as well in Clare, which is we get on the West Coast a lot, and the Gaeltacht is short-term lets. The amount of houses available on Daft compared to short-term lengths isn't double, isn't triple. It's 60 to 100 times on short-term lengths. And you can see why someone who owns an asset would want to do that, because like you only have to put up your house for a couple of days a year in the summer, and you probably get the same amount as you would renting it, you know? Like, geez, like I'm even trying to buy a house at the moment. I'm trying to leave the rental market. I'm very blessed to have a mortgage approval. And like, I went to go and view a house there and was actually interested in making an offer. And within a couple of days, taken off the market, sale agreed. And I just went on Airbnb today, and it's available in July to rent as a holiday home. And I'm like, oh, that could have been my home. And I'm someone who's blessed to try and buy a house. Never mind people trying to rent as well. Like, short-term lets are an issue, and it's a complex issue. Like, I do understand how people defend their private property for short-term lets, but like, here we go again. CATU's position is universal public housing.
Yeah, and look, I suppose to finish with you, Diarmuid, I was going to ask you about, people looking for a rental in Clare today, what realistic expectations they should have in terms of price, availability and timelines. But maybe added to that is the point George is making, that at times you may have the powers with the landlords, and you may have to accept a property, or you may be faced with little choice in terms of the properties that you're looking at. That there might be ones where landlords will go, well, I don't really have to put in the hard work here to do this place up, because I know I will more than likely get somebody in here because they're so desperate, and you end up with mouldy places or places that aren't properly furnished.
Yeah, and I suppose within every industry, you've
chancers.
You've different people take different views and different things, and landlords. You've good landlords, and you definitely have bad landlords. There's no question about it. You will see changes in the legislation, I think, coming in. Changes in the short-term let market is coming in the next few months as well, which is kind of shaking it up, and it may remove some of the stock from the short-term let market. It definitely is an issue. You can see it in a lot of cities. You can see it around Europe in terms of Airbnb and whatnot. In Clare, in more coastal holiday locations, summer locations, yes, it does happen. It's a tricky balance. You've a whole tourist industry is kind of hanging off it because our hotel stock is so limited. So it's really difficult. I think you're absolutely right. It's a really difficult situation. But just to come back to one point in terms of that investment, you want investors into the market because investment creates supply. And absolutely, as it stands at the moment, the state is very actively involved in providing rental property to the market. I mean, in be it through social housing, more affordable housing schemes, any private schemes that are coming online, 20% of them will go towards social and affordable housing. We hope that in the private part that you'd have landlords who'd invest and find it economical to do so. And then the more supply you get, market then finds its balance. It is not a balanced market at the moment, and supply is the only answer here. The other answer is you reduce demand. Do you know what I mean? You've less people, but I don't know how to do that unless, as we saw in the early teens, you get economic shocks, and that can that pulls back on the demand side, and you had many landlords who suffer the consequences of that on the flip side of it. But where we are now is we need supply. We don't want an economic shock. We want a stable economy. So we don't want demand to drop. We want supply to increase, and that means pulling and getting investors and the mom and pops for the next generation still in the market and coming into the market. Okay, final comment from yourself, George.
I suppose I still come back to this, like the supply and demand, right? So we want supply and we don't want to increase demand, as you have just said. But like, there's two things here. Like I've mentioned before, like if we're relying on investors to build houses, they need their returns. Their returns are super high rent. The problem will persist if this is the path to take. And, we have 163,000 vacant homes. Like, we could buy them and, make them into public housing. And like, public housing is the solution here. And I know we're going to be like, where'd you get the money for all this? But like, I think the government paid last year 800 million in HAP payments. And like, that makes no sense. Like, that is money that could be used to build homes, not going to landlords. And are we getting HAP payments to pay for foreign people with loads of money who are buying up houses here in this country? Now, doesn't really make sense to me personally.
We do have to leave it there. This is a conversation that could have been 4 or 5 times longer, and we still would have had plenty that we could have gotten to. But my thanks to George Stavrou, the former Clare CATU Chair, and from Sherry Fitzgerald McMahon here in Ennis Chamber McMahon. Thanks to both of you.
This feature, The Future of Housing, is funded by the News Reporting Scheme.